My parents sat me down at the dinner table and told me they had given my inherited townhouse to my sister. I looked at them for a long moment and said, "I already have the lawyer's number saved, and I already know what you did." That was the moment everything changed between us. And honestly, I still get a knot in my stomach thinking about it. I want to back up and explain how we got here, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. For the last 9 years, I have worked as a wildland firefighter in Northern California. It is the kind of job that pulls you away from civilization for weeks at a time. No phone signal, no internet, just smoke, heat, and a radio that only connects to your crew. I chose this life because it gave me purpose, but it also meant I missed a lot of things back home: birthdays, holidays, and eventually, the death of the one person who ever really understood me. That person was my grandfather, Frank. My parents divorced when I was 9, and things got messy fast. My mother worked double shifts just to keep the lights on, and my father was barely around. Frank stepped in without being asked. He picked me up from school, helped with homework at his kitchen table, and never once made me feel like a burden. My younger sister Rachel was different. She stayed closer to my parents growing up, always polished, always the one who seemed to have her life together on paper. But looks can be deceiving, and I would learn just how deceiving much later. Frank bought a townhouse in Seattle back in the early 80s, long before the city became what it is now. Over the years, it grew into something worth close to $500,000. More than the money, though, it held every memory I had of actually feeling like someone's priority. Frank always said that place would be mine one day. He put it in writing, signed and witnessed by his own attorney, no ambiguity at all. He told me plainly that I was the one who showed up for him, and Rachel, in his words, showed up when it was convenient. 2 years ago, I was deployed on a fire assignment deep in a national forest when Frank passed away suddenly from a heart attack. I did not find out for 4 days because there was simply no way to reach me. By the time I got word and made it back to civilization, the funeral had already happened without me. I carry guilt about that to this day, even though there was nothing I could have done differently. My parents told me not to worry about any of the paperwork. They said they would handle the estate details until I was back on stable ground and could take care of things myself. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? These were my parents. I had no reason to think they would do anything except help me through a hard time. 3 months ago, my assignment finally ended, and I drove straight to Seattle, excited in a way I had not felt in years. I pictured fixing up the place, maybe living there part-time between fire seasons, finally having somewhere permanent that felt like mine. I parked outside the townhouse and noticed the lights were on inside. I figured maybe a property manager was checking on things. I knocked, and when the door opened, Rachel was standing there in sweatpants, looking just as shocked to see me as I was to see her. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then Rachel forced a smile and said she was just staying there for a bit while she figured some things out. I asked her what that meant, and she got vague, mentioning something about a rough patch with her landlord. I did not push it right away because I still had no idea what was actually happening. I figured maybe our parents had let her crash there temporarily without telling me, which would have been annoying but not unforgivable. I called my mother that night to ask what was going on. There was this pause on the line, the kind of silence that tells you something is very wrong before a single word is spoken. She said we needed to talk as a family, all together, and that it would be easier to explain in person. I drove to my parents' house the next evening, still telling myself this was probably a misunderstanding that a 5-minute conversation could clear up. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting on the couch like she had been expecting this meeting for a while. My father would not quite meet my eyes. My mother kept twisting a napkin in her hands. Then my father finally said it. He told me that while I was away, they had made the decision to transfer the townhouse into Rachel's name. He said it so calmly, like he was telling me they had repainted a fence. I asked him to repeat himself, because I genuinely thought I misheard. He did not repeat it kindly. Instead, he explained that Rachel had gone through a difficult divorce and needed stability for herself and her son. He said that since I had a steady job and guaranteed housing through my work, they felt I could handle this better than she could. Rachel chimed in, saying she felt bad about how it happened, but that she had already been living there for 4 months and did not think it was fair to uproot her son again. I sat there trying to process what I was hearing. This was not some misplaced paperwork. This was a decision. A choice they made together. About my life, my grandfather's wishes, and my future, without ever once picking up the phone to call me. I asked to see the documents, and my father reluctantly slid a folder across the table. The signatures looked official. There were notary stamps, dates. Everything appeared legitimate at first glance. But something about the timeline felt off, and I could not shake the feeling that I was looking at something that had been prepared in advance rather than done properly after Frank's death. When I pointed out the inconsistency, my father got defensive almost instantly, which told me more than any document could. My mother started crying, insisting they only wanted to keep the family together, and that Frank would have wanted his grandchildren taken care of equally. Rachel said I was being dramatic, and that I already had a place to live through my job, so what did it matter to me? I remember sitting there thinking about every weekend I spent at Frank's house, every meal I cooked for him in his final years, every promise he made me look him in the eye and repeat back to him. None of that seemed to matter to anyone else in that room. I left, without raising my voice, without giving them the reaction they clearly expected. I checked into a hotel that night because I could not stand the idea of sleeping under a roof with people who had just admitted to stealing from me and calling it help. I spent the next 2 days barely eating, running through the conversation over and over, trying to figure out what my next move should be. That is when I remembered something Frank told me once, almost like he knew this day might come. He said, "Keep records of everything, because people who love you honestly never need proof, but people who do not will eventually make you regret not having any." The next morning, I started making calls, and one name kept coming up whenever I searched for estate attorneys who handled disputes like mine. Her name was Monica Reyes, and from the moment I sat down in her office and laid out everything, folder included, her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine concern. She flipped through the documents slowly, pausing on a few pages longer than others, and then looked up at me with a kind of seriousness that made my stomach tighten all over again. She explained that even if my parents had some form of power of attorney, which at this point was questionable at best, that authority does not give anyone the right to redirect inherited property away from a named beneficiary in a will. What they did, she said plainly, was not a gray area. It was fraud, dressed up to look official. She pointed out 3 separate red flags on the documents. The notary date listed was actually before Frank had passed away, which made no logical sense if the transfer was supposedly handled after his death. Second, the notary's license number did not match any active notary in the state. And third, there was no legitimate power of attorney filing anywhere on record, meaning the authority my parents claimed to have simply did not exist on paper. Monica filed an emergency injunction that same week to freeze any further changes to the property, along with formal notices to my parents and Rachel demanding they not sell, renovate, or transfer anything further while this got sorted out. The response was immediate and loud. My father called me screaming, accusing me of turning our family into a courtroom drama over what he called a piece of property. My mother sobbed into the phone, saying she never imagined I would do this to my own family. Neither of them apologized. Neither of them once said the word wrong. During that same call, my father let something slip that changed everything. In the middle of his rant, he said they had been planning this for months, long before Frank even died, because they assumed Rachel's situation would only get worse and figured I would eventually understand once I saw how much she needed the place. That single sentence confirmed what Monica had already suspected. This was never a spontaneous decision made out of desperation. This was calculated, planned quietly while I was hundreds of miles away with no way to defend myself. Rachel's reaction was its own kind of ugly. She showed up unannounced at my hotel a few days later, furious about the injunction, accusing me of trying to make her and her son homeless out of spite. When I reminded her the townhouse was never legally hers to begin with, she actually argued that inheritance rules were outdated and that families should decide who needs something more, regardless of what a will says. She then offered what she called a compromise, letting me buy the townhouse back from her for $280,000, well below its actual value. As if she were doing me some enormous favor by selling me back what already belonged to me. The more I learned about her situation, the less sympathy I had left. She had not actually been struggling from a divorce alone. She had racked up significant credit card debt over the years and had been quietly asking our parents for money long before Frank ever got sick. This was not about protecting a vulnerable single mother. This was about bailing someone out using an inheritance that was never theirs to give. Monica told me the evidence was strong enough that we were likely looking at a clear win, but she warned me these cases can drag on and get emotionally exhausting long before they get resolved. She was right about that part more than I wanted to admit. Monica filed the full lawsuit a few weeks later, and this time we were not just asking to reverse the deed. We were pursuing claims of fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. The discovery process turned up things I honestly was not prepared for. There were text messages between my parents and Rachel dating back nearly 8 months before Frank died, discussing how to handle things once I was, in my father's exact words, out of the picture for a while, because of work. Reading that phrase felt like a punch to the chest. My own father had referred to my job protecting other people's homes and lives as an inconvenience to work around. The messages also revealed that Rachel had been pressuring our parents for months before Frank got sick, describing herself as drowning and needing a real solution, not another loan. Instead of helping her build better habits or face her actual financial problems, our parents decided the simplest fix was handing her someone else's inheritance and hoping I would eventually just accept it. During depositions, my father's story kept shifting under pressure. First, he claimed it was purely about Rachel's mental health. Then he said he assumed I did not really want the property anyway. Eventually, under direct questioning, he admitted they figured I would forgive them because I had always been what he called the easy one in the family, the one who never made waves. My mother broke down during her deposition, admitting through tears that she knew what they were doing was wrong but felt caught between two children she loved differently. Rachel's deposition did more damage to their case than anything else. She was combative from the start, insisting she deserved the townhouse because she had actually been living in it and improving it, unlike me, who she said only cared about it from far away. She admitted, almost proudly, that she had already renovated the kitchen and removed several of Frank's original built-in shelves. Changes she framed as upgrades that increased the home's value rather than damage to something that was never hers to alter. The judge assigned to our case, a woman named Judge Alvarez, did not hide her frustration during the preliminary hearing. She called the transfer a clear-cut case of manufactured authority and said the paperwork alone told a story that contradicted everything my parents claimed under oath. She granted an order requiring Rachel to vacate within 30 days and barred any further changes to the property in the meantime. News of the lawsuit spread through the extended family faster than I expected, and the reaction split people right down the middle. My cousin Elena called me in tears, saying she had no idea the paperwork was forged and that our parents had told everyone Frank changed his mind about the will before he died, a claim that was completely untrue. My uncle Marcus, who had originally sided with my parents and called me heartless for getting lawyers involved, reached out to apologize once he saw the actual evidence, and even offered to testify to what he knew about Frank's real wishes. Not everyone came around, though. My Aunt Diane accused me of fabricating documents just to punish my sister, insisting I should let the whole thing go for the sake of family peace, as if peace built on stolen property was something worth protecting. My parents, even after the fraud was laid out in black and white, kept telling relatives I was choosing lawyers over family loyalty. The irony of that accusation was almost too much to process, considering who actually broke trust first. Rachel's 30 days to vacate came and went slower than I expected, mostly because she spent most of that time trying every possible angle to delay it. She filed a motion claiming sudden hardship, arguing that moving would traumatize her son during the school year. Judge Alvarez asked her directly why her hardship should outweigh mine, considering the property was never legally hers in the first place. Rachel had no real answer, and the judge denied the motion without much hesitation. On the actual day she was required to leave, Rachel made sure to leave her mark. Neighbors later told me she spent the morning ripping out cabinets she claimed she had personally paid for, even though the receipts eventually showed my parents had covered most of it. She pulled light fixtures out of the ceiling, damaged part of the hardwood flooring trying to remove built-in shelving, and left holes in 2 walls where she had apparently tried to take out a mounted television bracket that was never even hers. Someone finally called the police when she started loading Frank's old porch furniture into a truck, claiming she deserved to take something for her trouble. The damage added a significant amount to what she already owed once everything was tallied, pushing the total judgment past $70,000 once legal fees and repairs were factored in. She was ordered to repay it in monthly installments, though Monica warned me early on that collecting the full amount from someone in her financial position might never fully happen, and she was right to set that expectation. Before she left the state to stay with a friend across the country, Rachel sent me one final message. She said she hoped I was happy now that I had destroyed the family over a house. I did not respond, because at that point, there was nothing left to explain to someone who still refused to see what she had actually done. My parents' response after everything was finalized was its own kind of disappointing. They paid what the court ordered, because they had no other option, but neither of them ever said the word sorry, not once, not even privately. My father mailed me a check with a short note attached, calling it, in his words, the cost of choosing money over family. I remember reading that line and feeling something shift inside me, a kind of quiet clarity rather than anger. They had forged documents, lied to relatives, and tried to convince an entire family that I was the villain for refusing to be quietly robbed, and somehow, in his mind, I was still the one who had broken something. The relatives who stood by me throughout this became more important to me than I expected. My cousin Elena helped me sort through boxes of Frank's belongings that Rachel had stored away, and we found things I never knew existed, including letters Frank had written to me during long stretches when I was away on assignment, letters my parents apparently never bothered to forward. In one, he wrote that he hoped the townhouse would give me somewhere steady to land whenever I was ready to slow down, a place that was fully mine, no conditions attached. Reading his words for the first time made everything that had happened over the past several months feel worth it in a way I had not let myself fully feel until that moment. This fight was never really about square footage or property value. It was about making sure someone who loved me unconditionally did not get erased by people who saw his final wish as something negotiable. I moved into the townhouse about 2 months after the final ruling, and I am writing this last part, sitting in Frank's old living room, which finally looks like his again, instead of whatever Rachel tried to turn it into. I spent weeks undoing her renovations, bringing back the original cabinets from photos Elena helped me track down, restoring the paint colors Frank had chosen decades ago, and finding a few pieces of his furniture that had been shoved into a storage unit instead of thrown away. Every small detail I restored felt like giving him back something that was almost taken permanently. I decided to step back from full-time fire assignments for now. The financial stability from the settlement, combined with finally having a place that is genuinely mine, gave me room to breathe for the first time in years. I am using some of my benefits to finish a degree I put on hold when I first joined the crew, and I picked up part-time work locally so I can actually be present somewhere instead of constantly disappearing for weeks at a time. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I also started seeing someone, a paralegal, who worked closely with Monica throughout the case. We connected over long conversations about fairness and boundaries, the kind of conversations I never expected to have with someone during what was supposed to be the worst year of my life. She has a way of reminding me that protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel, something I needed to hear more than I realized. Looking back, there are a few things I keep coming back to. I am grateful for the people online who told me to trust my instincts early on, because without that push, I might have let the whole thing slide out of some misplaced sense of keeping the peace. I am grateful for the relatives who chose truth over comfort, even when it meant standing against people they had known their whole lives. And I am grateful, more than anything, that I finally understood something Frank tried to teach me long before any of this happened. Love does not ask you to disappear, so someone else can be comfortable. My parents and Rachel are still telling their version of events to anyone who will listen, painting themselves as the ones who suffered because I refused to simply let something go. I do not carry the anger I used to. What I feel now is closer to a quiet kind of distance. The understanding that some people will never admit fault, and waiting for that admission is its own trap. I stopped waiting. Frank left me this place because he trusted me to protect what he built, not because he wanted me to fight my own family for it. But sometimes those two things end up being the same battle. I think about that almost every day now, standing in these rooms he loved so much, knowing his final wish is finally being honored the way he intended. So here is what I keep asking myself, and maybe some of you have an answer. My family says I destroyed us over a piece of property. But if protecting what someone you loved specifically wanted you to have is considered destroying a family, then maybe that family was never as solid as everyone pretended it was to begin with. Do you think standing your ground when people you trust try to take something that was rightfully yours actually breaks a family? Or does it just reveal what was already broken long before any of this started?